The opening system we are going to look at in this video is probably the equivalent to the Sicilian against first e4. And this is the Grunfeld against first d4. A lot of players are struggling to find a reliable system. And the reason is that usually black knows much better what he is doing, because black players tend to play it very often, while white doesn't face it so much but still needs to know a lot. And in the game Grandmaster Greenfeld against International Master Kolbus, the white player shows a very reliable system, which is also very fine for playing for a win. So white starts with first d4, knight to f6, c4, g6. And now a usual move which would lead into the Grunfeld is knight to c3, then d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, e4, and now this variation. And usually black knows much more, as mentioned, so some white players try to circumvent this. For example, by playing knight to f3, but this also doesn't work because sooner or later the d5 move is being played. Then, for example, castle, knight b6 and e4, and then bishop g4, and white faces already some issues. So what could you possibly play to circumvent all this? And the move which Grandmaster Greenfeld played is g3. So now it's not so easy because the knight isn't on c3 and also there's no knight on f3. And this will be very important. So bishop to g7, bishop to g2. And if black wants to play d5, he has to do it right now, because otherwise, if he castled, white could play knight to c3, and now white is covering this square 3 times, while d5 would be only covered twice. So d5 by black cannot be played. So therefore, black plays d5 immediately. White takes, and this looks like a usual Grunfeld, but instead of knight f3, he just goes e4. So the knight has to move to b4 or b6, and black decides to go to b6. And now the trick is not to play knight to f3, because we have seen then we might end up in some of the bishop g4 lines, and white doesn't want to get into these things. So therefore he plays knight to e2. So now bishop to g4 could be met by moves like knight to c3, normal developing moves. So now black has a very important choice to make, either castle or not delay the choice, and it's usually c5. Now trying to activate the bishop on g7. Black could also just castle and delay this decision for one move and then play c5. Or other moves, because in the game, International Master Kolbus decided to go for e5. But this is somehow dubious, because this pawn is blocking this bishop. So therefore, white plays the very logical d5, because now the bishop is covering the pawn, but the bishop is out of the game basically. Now black wants to question the d5 pawn, to some extent at least. Plays c6. And now comes a very typical move for these lines in the knight e2 Grunfeld. Knight e to c3. We have seen this in another variation or another opening against the modern by Fedoseev, where he just moved his knight to c4. You can also take the other route here. And this is very similar. So black castles, white castles, knight to d7, and now white tries to gain space with a4, and maybe already threatening a5 at some point. So black plays a5 himself, knight to a3, controlling these two very important squares. and then rook e8 was played. Now white just continues the very development, very logical moves, bishop e3, and International Master Kolbus decided that this bishop on g7 is rather useless, so let's relocate it to f8 and then offer the exchange. So white just continues the development and bishop to c5 was played. So this bishop first moved to g7, then back to f8 and now to c5 to be exchanged against the bishop on e3, which only moved once. So from a logical perspective, this must be better for white in most cases. There might be some exceptions, but usually it's good for white if he gains so many tempi. So rook f to d1, continuing the development. Queen to e7, pardon me, and now rook to c1. And now you can see white has developed all pieces while black is still struggling. This bishop, for example. So playing for material wouldn't work here, so therefore black decides to take on e3, then queen takes e3. And now black could have played for something if he had played queen to c5, and the idea is to lure white into the exchange of queens, which should be okay for black. And white might have lost huge chunks of his advantage. But of course, white is not forced to exchange. White could play something like queen to e2 or queen to d3. But black played queen to b4. And this queen here looks very threatened or sensible. So it might be trapped. And Grandmaster Greenfeld saw this and sacrificed the a4 pawn by playing knight to a2. Now the question is if you can take the a4 pawn. Black decided that it's worth a try, so took it because the position is already very bad. d6. And now white has a very strong passed pawn. The alternative was a move like bishop to f1 immediately and trying to trap the queen later if the pawn on c6 is removed. But white decided to play d6, and let's continue this game. So, and now, well, there are some threats, but c5 might have just fastened the loss of black, because after bishop to c1 there is no good response. For example, queen to c6, then simply bishop b5, and you can see this queen is trapped. It's lost, and in best case black gets a bishop for the queen and completely lost. So therefore black plays c4, and white just continues by attacking the queen with knight to c3. Queen goes back to b4, and just now white takes on c4. And this looks like as if white had lost a piece, but actually black cannot win anything here. Let's exchange here and see what had happened if the queen had taken on c4. Then simply knight to d5. And the issue is the queen has to move, it's attacked right now. Queen goes to a4, and now knight to c7, exploiting the fact that black hasn't finished development. The rooks are not connected yet. And therefore white gains material here. So this had been bad. Black decided to play knight to f6, and now white played queen to f3, and black decided that he cannot move the knight, so he defends the knight with the king. And now it's your turn. Take a few seconds and try to find the winning move here. It's not that difficult if you use the passed pawn or see the idea with the passed pawn. So now let's continue. It's queen takes f6 check, because after king takes f6 there's knight to d5 check, And now the king has to move and the queen is attacked. And this is the entire reason why queen to f6 check works. White gains back the queen. And we will see what will follow then. King to g7. Knight takes b4. Black is forced to take this knight. A takes b4. And now comes the move. d7. It's a fork. And again we see the bad development of black decides the game. Well, in a not desired way for black, of course. So rook to d8 played, and after d takes c8, queen, rook takes c8, rooks are exchanged, bishop d5, rook to d7, and after rook to c4, black decided to resign here. So, as you can see, this g3 and bishop e2, knight e2 variation against the Grunfeld is very ambitious, and you might get your opponents out of their comfort zone because usually they are not used to play such positions. Let me know what you think about this opening system. As always, I hope you liked the video. If you did so, feel free to leave a like. And if you want to see more of such content, feel free to subscribe. See you.